Everybody, welcome back. Episode 5 of the podcast. I took a week off, and I gotta be honest, it was a great week off. I had a podcast prepared for all the downtime, with the coronavirus, because I was thinking ahead when I left North Carolina almost 2 weeks ago to go to Maine. I thought, if people have to stay inside, I would love to have a bunch of content for them to listen to. But honestly, it was a rushed episode. I wasn't really happy with it, so I decided to say, let's scrap it and do another one. Lucky for me, I had access to my dad all week. He was staying home anyway because he had a minor procedure, but he's doing great. No health issues. He actually feels really good. He's been telling me, and I kept my distance from him while I was at the house up in Maine. Just to be sure I didn't pass anything along, but I've been in quarantine myself for, I think it's been about 14 days, and I feel great. Anyway, this episode is all about media throughout the years. And throughout the years, meaning since my dad was born in 1942, he said at age 6 is when he remembers. That was in 1948. That's when he remembers watching the first program on television. It was on a black and white TV. And he goes on to tell me about color televisions, film, going to the theaters to watch cartoons on Saturday, seeing the aftermath of the Kennedy assassination broadcast on TV, all kinds of things. And he tells me a little bit about his iPhone, which he loves, his iPad, basically just as much tech and media as I could ask him about over the course of about 30 minutes. So look forward to listening to my dad talk about yesteryear, about his relationship to media, film, content just from the 40s. It's kind of amazing. He is like a living museum of history, and he has some cool stories about it. So sit back and enjoy this episode of the Daveismedia podcast with my dad, Brewster.
My name is Brewster Harding. I am a retired administrator for retail gift shops in Maine.
Well, it's your company.
Right.
Administrator, yeah.
Well, that's a person that kind of oversees everything.
So you're the boss.
I used to be chief cook and bottle washer, but now I kind of observe and fill in where necessary. Let me go back to the TV thing. So I only think of television because that was like the first, other than radio, that was the big revolution in mass communication. So tell me what it was like back then, what TV was like, and then looking back, what did you realize it really was? Now that you can look back on, Well, it was a special appliance in a house, and only one neighbor in our neighborhood had a television back in probably 1948, 48 or 9, and we would all go over there after school for certain kid programs that were on.
Like what was on?
Kukla, Fran and Ollie was a puppet show.
Puppet show?
A puppet show, and then Howdy Doody. Big Brother Bill, I think, and Howdy Doody and Mr. Bluster and all the characters. It was a kid show, and it was...
How old were you?
Well, in 1948, I was 6.
Dang.
And probably that lasted a couple of years, and then another house got it, and so we'd go over there. There was more children in that house, so maybe 4 or 5 of us would watch a couple of hours of programming after school, and then we'd have to go home. So that was the beginning of it. And then in the early 50s, another closer neighbor had a television, and they would call us over for every Sunday night for the Ed Sullivan Show. Ed Sullivan was one of the first big shows, and they had, of course, a lot of different guests, and it was a...
So it was like a variety show.
Variety show. And so it was like a family show, and the adults would tell the kids, come on, we're going to watch this every Sunday night. It's kind of like a little party. But we only got like 2 channels, or maybe 3 channels at the most around that time. And even through the 50s, the channels were sparse.
Television wasn't the main means of communication. People were still going to movies. They were getting newsreel information at the theaters. Usually they'd have cartoons or maybe a feature western, and then during intermission or right in the middle of it, they'd have a newsreel. So that's how we'd get news. But radio was still real important during the 40s and into the 50s. Gradually, the shows that were on radio started appearing on television.
How often would you say when you came home the radio was on?
Well, in our house, I don't think it was on. My mother really never had it, but my friend's house, which we used to go to, she had it on all the time.
Like, would you say it was music or talk
Music.
radio?
Music, yeah.
When did talk radio really come?
Talk radio, I'd say in the late 90s, something like that. Really.
So really back then it was like there'd be a breaking news bulletin or something?
Might be breaking news, or every night there was syndicated or different CBS or NBC would have their broadcaster. Like Edward Murrow was one of the first news broadcasters, and he started right after World War II and became a well-known broadcaster and interviewer. And then after that was Walter Cronkite. And he was on in the 60s, 70s, maybe into the early 80s. And he was like the word on news. People believed him.
I just think about that because hearing you say that news and talk radio wasn't really a format, it seems like you had to go and seek out the news. Now you can't avoid the news.
Right, and in those days, newspapers were very important. Newspapers had, you'd find 3 or 4 or 5 newspapers in one city. So there was plenty of news. There was a morning paper, there was an evening paper, sometimes it was a midday paper. And that's where I'd say most people got their news. Something could happen in the morning and you'd hear about it at night, so it was relatively fast.
But all print.
All print.
All print media.
So the sensational type news on television, I don't think really started until you had...
Like cable?
Yeah, cable, and I'm thinking of Wolf Blitzer was one of the first ones to make the news critical and maybe even fearsome. They would have breaking news became finally the word.
And now it's like Wolf Blitzer in the Situation Room.
Yeah, but they'd say breaking news when every day there was breaking news, you know.
That's news. That's what news is.
All right. So it wasn't that way in the early days. It was pretty straight-laced, formalized reporting.
So, I was just thinking of this. Do you feel like people were less stressed because they had less information? Do you think there's a correlation there? Do you feel like people were just less stressed in general?
I think they were less stressed than today.
Yeah.
I mean, today you have broadcasters that have even a tone of fear coming through and making people, you know, want to find out what's going to happen to them, you know.
Right.
Whereas back in those days, well, you know, there were difficult stories. There was JFK's assassination. There was Vietnam War. They would have body counts nightly on the news. You know, how many were killed, maybe 200 or 300, 400 in a week in Vietnam, and it was pretty difficult to hear.
And so you were seeing that on TV?
On TV with the newscasters.
So you're having all this. I guess back then you're really not having media bombardment. You don't have. There's no phones. There's no cell phones. There's no mobile phones.
Right.
So you still have to be at a location to get this news. You can't be on the move. Or you have radio in the car, I guess. Right.
I mean, news was not such a big percentage of what was broadcast. Mm-hmm. It was a lot of music. There were soap operas. There were variety shows on the radio. Jack Benny was one of the first ones. They would have a cast of people that you would follow every week. So it radio was the forerunner for television in a lot of ways in the formats.
What would you say is maybe like a memorable or like a really positive experience with, I don't know, was it going to the movies or TV, something that you just always replay in your head? Because you told me how you used to go over to that guy Mike's house and watch. He had like a movie projector or something.
Right. Yeah, that fellow, a neighbor, he had a movie projector and a screen in his basement, and he had, I think it was 8mm films, or maybe 16mm films, put out by Castle and other companies that would have, cartoons, or there might be Laurel and Hardy, slapstick type movies from the early days. But I think the most memorable things are going on a Saturday with a friend or two to the theater and having 20 or 24 cartoons in a row.
How long would that last? How long was like a cartoon?
Oh, maybe 3 or 4 minutes. Not much different than ones you might see today with Daffy Duck and Roadrunner and so forth. Probably, and there'd be an intermission. So it might have been an hour and a half or maybe 2 hours at the most.
Did you ever sit through some cartoons and get like war updates? Because I've seen in the movies a lot, they'll have somebody goes in the theater and pays like a quarter or a nickel or something, and there'll be like an update on the war or an update on news, and then they'll go back to the cartoons.
Yeah, they would have a newsreel maybe even in the beginning, before the cartoons. Although the cartoons were mostly for kids, so you're more likely to see a newsreel in conjunction with a feature film. Oh, okay. Yeah.
So instead of previews for other movies, they would have newsreel.
Exactly. They never had previews for other movies back then.
Previews are my favorit part.
No trailers.
No trailers. I love watching trailers.
That I can recall. It was fun at the theater. Everybody, there would be big crowds, and there were great Hollywood movies all through the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. A lot of them were musicals, or they'd be war movies or westerns.
What were your favorite kind of movies to go see?
I guess the westerns. There was a lot of westerns on the radio. I used to listen to Hopalong Cassidy. I'd listen to Sergeant Yukon's. I can't remember the full name.
I only know Hopalong Cassidy because you told me.
Yeah, right.
I don't know.
But they'd have, Roy Rogers. They'd have Gene Autry and other Bob Steele and other, actors that became famous with their westerns. The westerns would be maybe half hour long, maybe 45 minutes long. And then they converted over to television. You had a half hour of Lone Ranger, and we used to always watch The Lone Ranger. There were some great early shows. It was You Bet Your Life with the Groucho Marx, funny show.
What about feature films? When did you start going to see an hour-long film or longer?
Well, the first one I can remember is seeing the movie Kon-Tiki, about a group that built a raft and sailed across the Pacific.
Wow.
My dad took me to that. So probably you'd go with your parents to a feature film, whereas the cartoons you'd go, maybe your parents would drop you off.
And you'd meet some friends.
Meet some friends there, yeah. And then there were a couple of not horror movies, but scary movies like King Kong, The Beast from 10,000 Fathoms.
Right.
Some, Bela Lugosi and those were popular. A lot of them were B-grade movies, but they became cult movies after a while.
So, do you remember the first movies you took me and Ryan to? I remember you took us to see Super Mario Brothers.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
But I don't know if I was 10, around there, younger.
I don't know when that was, probably in the early 90s or something.
Yeah, early 90s. But the first, I remember, Claudette took us to go see, or no, not Claudette, but her nanny, I can't remember who, took all
Judy?
of us. Yeah. No, her sister.
Her sister?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, well, anyway, somebody took us to go see Beauty and the Beast.
Oh, yeah.
I think, or no, Jungle Book.
Okay.
I think that was the first Disney film I ever saw in the theater.
Yeah.
I don't really remember the movie. I just remember that we went to it.
It's kind of hard to remember the first when it's so long ago. But Disney came on television probably in the late 60s.
Right.
And that was another big Sunday night, go visit some people who had a television. And eventually it was go visit the person that had a color television.
Right. So when did you, right, so who do you remember had a color television?
Well, some people, their name was Harper, I think.
Were they friends of yours or like family
They were friends of my parents.
Oh, okay.
And they probably had a child, and so
it was like a social gathering
yeah,
thing?
and I think it was either 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock in the evening on a Sunday evening. So it was, you had to be back to get to bed for school at that age.
Mm-hmm.
But it was, in color, and it was a spectacular show every time. It was PG.
So what do you think about my career choice? And now, like, you're growing up with media. I'm going to assume you probably never wanted to, I don't know, make radio or make TV. And I just decided this all I want to do is make, content.
Content. Well, I think it's a natural outgrowth of your schoolwork. You're always good in English. You had some good courses even in middle school in video.
I think, yeah, that's right.
I think that's where you really
there's video
started.
of me in, I think, like 7th and 8th grade.
Yeah, and that was
in some video class.
Yeah,
Project X.
that was a start. So you kind of had that in the background when you went to college, and you latched onto it. And it seems like something you enjoy doing, and I guess if you enjoy doing something, you'll do well at it.
But it seems so much easier to do. Like today, you can go to the store, or not even. If you have a phone, you have internet access, you can make money with making media.
True.
I mean, back, if I was, your age, it was a lot harder. Like pre-internet, being, like, you have to know somebody to get in with the studio, you have to start sweeping the floor, you have to be a PA, you have to get coffee, you have to do all those jobs to work your way up the ladder. It still works that way at the big studios, but nowadays you can go off and make your own content.
Right, it's unbelievable. Just like an iPhone, who thought you could take photos, you could do all this communication, you can download whatever you want. It's true. We used to beg for walkie-talkies.
Really?
So we could maybe go to the other person's yard and be able to talk to them, in the distance. And that was a dream, but they never made them small enough. By the time they made them small enough, everything started getting smaller and faster.
I'm trying to think. When did you have your first? I'm trying to go through all these like devices in my head. When did you have your first cordless phone?
Cordless phone. Well, that was probably back in the 80s, late 80s. See, I went to, I don't know, maybe even 2000s. I can't remember.
So what do you think about, like, Brooklyn, all these kids that grow up only digital? All they know is everything exists. It doesn't really exist in concrete, right? I mean, you open a computer or a phone, everything's in there.
Well, it's a tremendous advancement forward. I mean, they're just in another world. And even when they get to be 20 or 30, they'll be faster still for the kids growing up. So they've just got to learn how to control it. I mean, it can overtake your life in a lot of ways if you're not balanced. It's too bad because people really need to experience the world in reality, in 3-dimension, not just on the phone. So I don't know. It's just going to be part of their brain. I mean, we all have our phones, which are so necessary, and we just want to be connected all the time.
Right. I think it's, I don't think it's a bad thing. I think what it does is it exposes somebody's, like, maybe good or bad habits with how they use, the media form. I think our identities offline and online are becoming, one and the same. We can leave stuff out of our online identity that we don't like, but eventually those two things I think meld together and become like that's who you are. If you're really not hiding anything, you put everything online.
Right.
Right. So
But
where's the line? Like how much do you personally what kind of things do you share?
well, I think we're learning. At least I'm learning to be pretty careful about what you share,
Right.
because they're collecting data like crazy, and then you get bombarded with ads. And I mean, some people like that. Some people like to be on Facebook all the time, or Twitter.
Do you have a Twitter?
No, I don't do Twitter.
I don't really do it either.
But
I have a Twitter, but I don't. Take me back to what you were mentioning about when President Kennedy was killed. What do you remember about seeing that?
Well, we were glued to the television for probably 48 hours or more, just to watch history unfold. We saw Jack Ruby shoot whoever the guy was that shot Kennedy, I can't remember. And then, things were unfolding as you watch television. So that was pretty dramatic, and everyone was just devastated. Well, most everybody.
Mm-hmm.
So everybody, like right now, everybody hunkered down at home, and the world stopped for 48 hours.
Well, I mentioned to Lily today that, I haven't really watched the president at all until the last week. I've seen him like 3 or 4 times. I've tuned in to watch.
Yeah.
Not to get, I really haven't gotten any new information that I couldn't get from the internet, but...
You wanted to just see his style and how his...
It was more I was hoping for some updates, or hoping that, an episode like this would change someone, or, you're seeing the true colors. I think that we're seeing the true colors, and this is how this person leads.
Right.
Good or bad, that's what an event does.
Right, we are getting to see, and I think vice versa.
So, okay, so Lyndon B. Johnson, who's the VP, he becomes president. So what do you remember about seeing him on TV? Because I remember with Kennedy, from what I've watched and learned about, he did such a good job in that debate against Nixon, because that was the first televised debate. And Nixon just wasn't TV ready. I think that people now were saying, you have to be good on television for us to really accept that you can handle it.
Right.
And I think that helped Kennedy get elected.
Kennedy really was probably the first one that really took advantage of television. Eisenhower was a little too early. He was still film-oriented with a little bit of television. But
and you mean they would do propaganda films, or they would shoot films and run them at the Saturday cartoons?
Well, no, you'd get news by film of Eisenhower. It would be news clips on the evening news. Whereas Kennedy started using, his daily conference or his occasional news conferences. I think he was one of the first to televise those.
To do,
and so you got to really see the president and get to know him better.
And do you think, I think that became an expectation that the American people thought, okay, you set the precedent.
Right.
The president sets the precedent to...
Well, that may be why Reagan was so good, because he had already been an actor.
Right.
And so that was played well for him. But everyone realizes that the television is the way you get known now.
So if there was one form of media that you would get rid of, what would you get rid of?
At this point?
What could you live without? If you were trapped on a desert island, I guess, what would you bring with you? Would it be a radio or a TV, computer?
I'd probably bring some books. Books just don't get in your face. You can put them down whenever you want. You can turn off a TV as well, but I love books, And I don't like the digital books.
Strains the eyes.
Yeah, I think the screen gets to you.
What about your iPad? I see you reading your news on the iPad.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, ideally it'd be nice not to have to watch the news, because it's really takes over and adds a lot to your attention and your energy. It drains you or it excites you.
Do you think that, I'm just having more thoughts or going through my head now. Do you think that television is hiding the fact that we have a lot of illiteracy? Like, let's just imagine that we didn't have television news. How many people do you think would actually be informed?
Well, probably.
Right? Because you have to read, and you have to read at a higher level.
Yeah.
To.
Well, people still do listen to the radio on their cars, and a lot of people are in cars, and that's where they get a lot of the news. I don't know. There are a lot of people that are illiterate. They're not learning much at school, or they're leaving school early, and I don't think they understand what they're seeing because they don't have an education. If you don't have a good education about history and civics, you can't really connect to what's going on in the news.
How do you think schools are going to change? Because it's clear that the value proposition of a college, it costs $160,000 for me to go to Santa Clara. So
don't remind me.
Yeah, well, it's all paid off. It's all done. But I'm just thinking, what weight do you put on the traditional school experience? Do you think that's going to change into a new experience of school? And then the things that you learn, do you think there's a way to learn all those things, for example, that you and I learned going through school, in a different way than the traditional route?
Well, maybe some fields you could get some hands-on experience, but as you know, you need some basics. You need to be able to read and write, communicate. You need to learn how to communicate, no matter what kind of a job you're going to have.
More than ever.
So you're not going to get that just by listening and watching, because there's a lot of people that speak very simply.
I think that, to pile on that, a lot of people disregard one-on-one learning or face-to-face because they say, well, I can just watch a YouTube video, right, or I can just, get online.
Well, true. People are learning. They're getting degrees from school, online. You've got to have a lot of self-control to spend the time. You don't have teachers beating you over the head to get your homework done. You have to want to learn, I think.
It's a lot of self-discipline.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Yeah.
I just think
you got to be motivated to do that.
Yeah, it's saying that's a nice thought. That's a great, in theory, I think that works out most of the time. But people miss the ability to connect in person, and I think sometimes you really need that to drive a point home, to see it in front of you. Like going to film class, I could watch the same curriculum online, but being there and understanding when somebody says, strike this light.
Hands-on.
The hands-on part of it you don't get because you're not there, because, it's like playing basketball.
Sure.
I can't just watch basketball. I have to play at some point.
Well, it's like somebody wants to be a plumber or electrician. You've got to do hands-on learning and practicing. So there's a lot of fields still, many, that require education. And if you don't, you're going to end up being a feather duster in a absorbing junior plant or something.
But what you said about communicating, I think, is the most important point, is you have to learn to become a good communicator, regardless of the field you want to be in.
Yeah.
If you're a plumber, you have to communicate to the client what you're going to do, or to your boss, or to your fellow coworkers how you're going to get something done. Now people literally make money on YouTube teaching and communicating skills to other people.
Yeah, you can learn some things that way, but there's so many blue-collar jobs that people might have difficult learning other than being hands-on.
Right.
What's up, podcast? It's Dave. I wanted to let you know I have a YouTube channel, so if you're already seeing this on YouTube, no duh, this is just an ad for the podcast. I'm in the creative space right now. I'm actually editing my first episode right in here. So if this is past episode 1, hey, I'm wearing the same sweatshirt as episode 1, so it's just a look back. Anyway, go check out my vlog on YouTube. I do travel vlogging, BTS of working with my man Max Maxwell, all kinds of great stuff on there. Go check that out. And if you're a sponsor, this could be your ad spot. Right now I don't have a sponsor because this is my first episode. So anyway, sponsors out there, this is your ad spot. All right, back to the podcast.
Last 5 minutes here.
Okay.
What is the most impressive technological advancement you've seen in your lifetime?
I guess it has to be the iPhone. It's just so versatile. It saves so much time. You can improve your work with it. I think it saves time. It's making us all go faster. I'm not sure that's great. But for someone who's been from back in the day when we longed for walkie-talkies, we've come a long way. You never could have dreamed it. So.
It's crazy. I remember the first cell phone you had was that Nokia brick.
Yeah.
And you'd let me borrow it just to text you.
Oh, yeah.
I guess to call the house.
Yeah.
To say I needed a ride somewhere. That was in it. I think all
that was the first
Snake.
time.
You remember that game Snake?
Yeah.
Snake would go around the screen and eat the apples.
Yeah. Well, it kind of started with some of the games like, what was the first video game?
Atari? Like Tetris?
No,
Pong?
Pong, back and forth. So yeah, all these electronics have come in and changed the world a lot.
And yet you still surround yourself with vinyl records, LPs,
Right,
and 35s and 45s.
Yeah, records, are the true second generation to the original master on any recording. So it's good to have recordings that you like to listen to, and I like to collect certain genres. So that seems like a throwback, but vinyl's coming back.
Look at you. You hedged your bets. How many records have you owned?
Well, probably 10,000 or more.
They fill up the house, that's for sure.
They fill up sections of the house. Albums, 78s, 45s.
When did you start collecting?
When rock and roll first started, I'd say about 1954, when Bill Haley and some of the early groups started having hits on the radio. And then when Elvis came along, I was really into his early stuff. And then I liked the doo-wop harmony groups in the mid to late 50s. And then the Beatles were exciting. And then after that, I kind of lost interest in punk and...
So you kept collecting that same era?
Right, I keep collecting the doo-wops.
So what are you working on now? You're working on a big collection?
I'm trying to fill in my collection with some of the issues of different labels that I don't have from the 50s. And
is it 50s doo-wop? Is that pretty much what it...
Pretty much 50s doo-wop, yep. And more of these records are coming out as people my age pass along. There's going to be a lot of records coming out because people have collected hundreds of thousands in some collections.
So, last question. What do you want to hear me talk about on this podcast, on this channel, about media-wise? What would you be interested to hear more about?
Well, maybe how media could inform people better. How it could break through to people that only want to hear one side of the story, people who are getting hitched by the fake news and the propaganda that's out there. I think it's going to be a real problem to filter that out and
I agree. It's hard. Like, how do you know? How many sources do you have to do as a citizen just to find out if the news you have that you want to pass on is credible?
Right.
Like, it's not my job, but it feels like my job to filter out the news and make sure that what I'm getting is accurate.
Yeah, you do have to, and a lot of people can't do that, or they've got fixed ideas and they get in a little bubble.
And I think that's the difference between learning the skill of making media and then learning the ethics of it. Because the ethics, like, we're always manipulating. The point of making a film is to manipulate the images to, provide emotion, to evoke emotion from the audience, to tell a story logically in a linear fashion or to jump around, but you're manipulating it for good or for worse, for better or for worse.
Right.
So there's got to be some standard, or whatever the standard is. Some of these companies that are for profit need to be aiming for accuracy and not just pure profit.
Right. Yeah, that seems to be a difficult conundrum where you have capitalism out there where people have media companies that are beholden to stockholders rather than to fairness and even to democracy.
Well said. Well, we're going to have to do this again. I'm glad I can have you on the podcast. We're keeping our social distance here during the COVID-19 pandemic.
Well, it's been fun.
Yeah.
Nice to see what you do.
All right, thanks, Dad.
Okay.
All right, thanks for sticking around for the podcast. Hope you enjoyed. Remember to like, subscribe, hit the bell if you're watching this on YouTube. If you are listening out in podcast land, please give me a 5-star rating and give me some feedback. Let me know what you thought. I really like doing this style of interview with my dad and just kind of giving him the floor, really. As you can see from the video version, you don't see me in this podcast at all, but you can hear me off to the side asking the questions. And again, that was for social distancing, giving myself some space between me and my dad, so we weren't sitting right next to each other. I was behind the camera, he was in front, and I felt like that was the most appropriate thing to do and still get a good episode. So again, I'm Dave, and I am Media. Catch you next time.